Our next card for January is a watercolored card that I somewhat cased from Vicki Burdick. This is the card. It's using the Raspberry Ripple paper, soft suede, on a natural white background with the sentiment stamped, and then the new dies from Stampin' Up! Used to cut the two pieces for the center. But what I wanted to show you is how I watercolor the flowers. I've already stamped using the stamp set Secret Garden flower with Stays On Jet Black onto some watercolor paper, and this is just the cheap watercolor paper from Hobby Lobby that comes in the pad. Make sure you always use, when you're using your Stays On ink, because it is permanent, to always use Stays On cleaner to clean your stamps, and clean them immediately. The longer you leave it, the harder it will be to get the black off. I use an aqua painter, and I use the fine point. These are not the ones that come from Stampin' Up! Because theirs are not as fine as this. I prefer the extra fine point, which I believe I bought these online, not sure where. And I use a block to put my ink on instead of like messing up the inside of my ink pad lid. And I just use the markers, and I'm using the Raspberry Ripple, and just take the brush tip and rub it on a clear acrylic block like that, just to get some ink off. And we're going to use the Daffodil Delight for the center. I kind of, when I start off watercoloring, I try to make sure your Stays On ink is dry. It takes a few minutes. Kind of wet the whole area, because I'm going to color the whole thing in with a little bit of color, and then go back and do the highlights. You will need a piece of paper towel to dab your painter on. So pick up some color and just start coloring that in, all except for those little center berries, with your Raspberry Ripple, just to get a nice covering over the whole flower just to start with. And this is going to be cut out with the new die set from Stampin' Up! That has that cuts the flowers for you, which is a lifesaver, because you don't have to sit and snip and do crazy cutting. There's some of my students that don't like to watercolor, but they will love the fact they don't have to cut it out after they watercolored. At least there's one step saved. And get that all colored in just like that. And you want to let it kind of dry a little bit before you move to the next step, because if you don't, it will bleed over into it. So we'll take just a pause right there and let the that ink dry just a little bit. Okay. Now what we want to do is go back, and these areas that you see here, like where a petal is on top of a petal, underneath there needs to be darker. And these little flaps right here, that's where leaves have fallen over. So they should actually be lighter than what's underneath them. So we're just going to pick up a little bit of the color. I'm going to try to get a little bit of water out of the brush. Pick up a little bit of the color, and I just want to go under that leaf like that, because this is underneath, so it should be darker than the rest of the petal. And as you do that, then just use your brush and pull it out kind of to the edges. So start where it's under a leaf, and just do that all the way around on this second row. Like that, so that it's darker. And if you say, oh, well, I got that too dark, you can just take your painter and you can just pick back up some of that color off of there so that it looks darker. And then skip this edge and go on out here, because we don't want to have an edge that's still wet, because it'll just bleed right over into it. And get really dark along where these flaps are folded over, just like that. And just keep picking up your color and pulling it out. Try to stay away from the areas that are still wet. Like that. Now as it dries, we can go back and make some of those places even darker, like right here. This needs to be pretty dark along this little edge under this flap. And get some of the water out of your brush so that it will be darker. Pick that up, go along this edge right here, so this little flap is really dark up against it. You want the dark areas up against the light areas so it really accentuates what's shaded. Okay, that looks pretty good. When you cut this out with the die, it cuts pretty close, but it will show some of these places where I got out of the lines. To do that, you can just kind of scrub it with your brush, and it'll just pick that up. And you can touch it with your paper towel, and it's voila, gone. Now I'm going to pick up a little of the yellow and do the center. And then I'm going to mix a little bit of my red with the yellow so I have a little orange. And I'm just going to put a few little dots in there like that to kind of darken those little yellow places. And if you put a little yellow on some of these edges, like right there, or on this little tip where I left it kind of light, that will indicate this is the side of the flower that the sun may be coming from, and kind of gives it a little light as if it were the sun were actually shining on your petals. And that's how we do it. Then we run it through the die. The card is put together with, I used an embossing folder for the 3 panels. Panels are mounted to the naturals white, and then the watercolor flowers are put on with dimensionals around the edge of the other. You can add pearls or strips of maybe some designer paper cut with little flag ends underneath to accentuate it more. And I used the crochet ribbon because I did not have the matching raspberry ribbon. And that's how you are the card. Thank you.